Welcome to another episode of the Chronic Comeback podcast. Today, I am really happy and excited to have on the show Satori Clarke. Just a little bit of an introduction. Satori is a specialist in breath and nervous system repatterning and head of research at Breathwork Bali and co-founder of Breath Lab. So before coming to Bali, I knew I wanted to do something with breathwork, and I immediately found Breathwork Bali. Did like a month-long container, fell in love with it, and then realized there was an option to do group sessions, but also one-on-one sessions, which is when I was introduced to Satori, who has been helping me reprogram my nervous system. Would you say that's? Would you say that's?
We'll go with that word. Yeah.
So how are you anyway? How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing well. I'm just in the throes of writing a big paper for my master's program. But yeah, excited about the project that we have here with Breath Lab. That's just getting going.
Well, yeah, we'll definitely touch upon that. So I just want to, firstly, just taking it back to basics with regards to breath. I was actually speaking to my parents the other night, and I've got them. I haven't told you this. I've got them like box breathing and stuff. They're
That's amazing.
They're almost 80,
Awesome.
like in the mid 70s and 80, and they don't really know why they're doing it. And then I was tried to explain why they should do it because I read that book, Breath. And then even me, like I'm not very good at explaining it. Can you just talk through like why, for me, I feel like breath is one of the probably the most underrated areas to focus on. And people don't do it. People look at exercise, they look at sleep, even sleep's bad, but they look at exercise and like meditation and all that kind of stuff. Why is breath so important, and why are people so bad at it?
That's a really great question. Yeah, we look at kind of like the numbers or the stats. We breathe between 23 and 26,000 times per day. I would say on average, like 99% of those breaths that we take, we're not paying attention to. And if our breath isn't moving properly, our ability to create energy in our body, whether it's for movement and potentially physical training, but all kinds of movement, our digestive system is going to be offset, and also our sleep is going to be deeply impacted. And so it's really powerful because we always have it. It's literally under your nose. It can immediately change the way that our nervous system is functioning, which can alter which parts of our brain are more online. And I think really the reason, it's one of those things where because it's so simple, we discount it. Because I know how to breathe. I've literally been doing it all my life. I can breathe in my sleep. Like, so people often will be like, what, you want me to come to you and you're gonna like teach me how to breathe? Yeah. And it really is about the maladaptive patterns that we unconsciously have, or that have unconsciously happened to us in our bodies that we carry, that we're just not aware of because they've always been there. It's always like that as far as we know. And our culture is just not, we don't talk about breathing. It's just something that's assumed happens. If you're alive, you're doing it. So why look at it? Yeah. So it's a really interesting one when people start to become aware of your breath, and then you realize just how much you can shift with that.
Yeah. Well, we were talking just before we started recording that I'm staying in a place at the moment that's quite moldy, I think, and then so it's making me feel bunged up. And then I was just realizing that I was working then, I was breathing through my mouth, and because I've read this book, I was like super conscious of not breathing through my mouth. So it's like I'm almost like, oh no, I can't do that. What would you say, like breathing through the mouth, like I guess like shallow breathing? What are like the biggest things that people might do who are like completely unconscious of their breathing that could be, if they addressed, could make some like quite big changes?
Yeah, I think what we're seeing, and it's becoming like in the literature and scientific fields, we're becoming more and more aware of the problem and kind of coming back further and further to a root. And what has been identified is a hyperventilation syndrome or disorder, but to be labeled like that. And it's essentially that we're breathing quite shallow and we're breathing way faster than is actually ideal for the functioning of our autonomic nervous system. So yeah, there's a fair bit of mouth breathing. but also I think it's the rate at which people are breathing. It's way faster than is ideal for a human body. And then when we miss out on diaphragmatic breathing, there's like a whole host of other things that we're not creating in our body to help things to actually flow better. And that creates stagnation in the body, and that, goes on to diseases and discomfort and all that kind of thing.
What do you mean with, did you say diagrammatic? Is that what you said?
Diaphragmatic.
I know what you were saying, not diagram. I just couldn't pronounce it. I knew what you were saying. But as in
diaphragmatic. So yeah. Yeah. Do you want me to explain?
Yeah, please do. Please say.
I feel like you should know by now with all the work that we've done. But for anyone who doesn't know, a diaphragm. So there are actually 3 diaphragms of breath: the pelvic floor, the main diaphragm, which is a sheet of muscle under the rib cage, and then also actually in our throat, our vocal cords. So when people talk about diaphragmatic breathing, it's typically talking about the main sheet of muscle under the rib cage. And if we're breathing fast and shallow, then it's not going to be moving very much. Our lungs can inflate before that muscle actually moves anywhere. But if we breathe, first bringing breath down into the belly and then up into the chest, or even expanding the rib cage enough that the belly might then start protruding a little bit, that's when that main diaphragm is actually moving. And when we breathe diaphragmatically for an extended period of time, even just a few breaths, it does actually give an inner massage. So you're compressing the organs and then releasing them again, and that mechanically creates more blood flow, and that's just helpful for all of the visceral organs in our body.
And just we'll go on to the technique and all of that kind of stuff, and how all of that amazing stuff after this. But with regards to like how you can get yourself breathing like that, more like that naturally, is that through doing, because I do like box breathing, or I do cadence breathing that you told me about, which is simply just long breaths, really, like consciously doing long breaths for 10, 15, 20 minutes. That over a long period of time, will that start, that the theory behind it is that will start to have an impact on your breath throughout the day? Is that right?
Yeah. So the more, we can also think about when we're doing any kind of physical training or strengthening, that whatever we do in that training time is going to impact the way that our bodies can function. And I know you've talked about this part of your journey quite a bit, and it impacts the way that you can function and experience life. And it's very similar with breath, where when we bring our conscious awareness and breathe in a specific way, it will begin to repattern our body to even understand that it's available to do that. And the more that we practice it, the more our body will access it unconsciously. So I wouldn't anticipate, it's possible, but I wouldn't anticipate that in your sleep you'd start doing these long, slow, deep breaths, like controlled inhale and exhale. But it's definitely going to impact when, like, in a waking state. And I do think that it also will have an impact on the rate and the mechanics of breathing when you are asleep, just because there's, like, you're literally training muscles of respiration to move in a different way. And that's going to have an impact and a ripple effect through those thousands of breaths that we don't want to have to be paying attention to all day and all night.
Yeah. Okay. So moving on to like how we first started like working together, and I think when people hear about breath work, and which is how I heard about it, it's like I heard about it through like Wim Hof, I think other people, and that's quite a good entry point actually. And I think that he's probably done a great job, or whoever did that, in like commercializing it and makes it, an entry point for someone like me. And then I think like holotropic breathing, stuff like that. And so I heard of stuff like that. And like when I came to Bali, I was very much, it was well, you saw me, I was like, bringing a lot of masculine energy to it, like wanting to blast off to another dimension. And then I soon learned that the kind of the practice that you guys do, the conscious connected breathing, is there's a whole lot more to it. So could you just tell us, like, well, give us an introduction into conscious connected breathing, but how it differs to the other traditional types, if you can.
Yeah, for sure. If I can, I hope at this point I can do that with this technique. It's always different though, so let's see how I explain it. So I would say one of the biggest differences, between more mainstream therapeutic style breathwork and our the one that we offer through Breathwork Bali, is that we do have a relaxed exhale rather than any kind of push or force. So we're then balancing, as you were saying, like balancing that masculine driving energy of the inhale and then letting go on the exhale. And it's remarkable actually how many people I've worked with. It's so common that I would say the majority of us are controlling on the exhale. And we see that in tension, in pushing, in trying to get all of the air out, and just naturally the muscles are contracting at a subconscious level that people aren't trying to do, but it's the body's, for me, it's their unconscious patterns and the patterning in their autonomic nervous system, that there's this sense of like, I need to control what's happening. And so we're not very good at the letting go and the trusting of the life situation. And it really just serves different purposes. So Wim Hof, and in fairness, I've never really in-depth studied it. I've practiced it a little bit in the past. But from what I understand, it's typically a shorter practice, and it really is actually to amplify a stress response. And then, adding the cold water plunging to it, it can have all kinds of benefits, but it is setting off epinephrine and it is increasing dopamine levels. And that's because there's a lot of activation in the system. And holotropic is in a similar way, although you're laying down and it's an extended period of time, but it's also quite sympathetic tone. So it's more into the stress response. And what we are wanting to work with in our modality is actually creating nervous system regulation, which means that, yes, we can go into a stress response, but also we want to see some vagal tone involved in there, some ventral vagal tone, where we're able to stay with ourselves and not actually be blasted out and have these big wild experiences, which can still happen, but we want to actually be with our body and then be able to come down into some deep rest and relaxation. So the nervous system can learn, it can go into intensity, and it can come out and rest and recover. And I think the reason that our whole team is quite passionate about this, like quite a big difference in the approach, is that in the world that we're in, it is way too common for the majority of us to be in sympathetic tone, in stress, in trying to keep up with everything, and creating 500 different online offerings, and keeping up with our bills and also the dreams and the things that we want to do. And our culture just doesn't actually value the rest that our human bodies need. And it's, I think you've already had a chat with someone, your sleep coach, and the book Why We Sleep. We're just becoming more and more aware of how integral, deep, and quality rest is for us to actually have a life that can be really enjoyable.
Yeah. Oh, well, I thought what was really interesting for me is like with Wim Hof, like it was all about the up part, and it was all about the getting to this like high, and it was like chasing. And for someone like me, who's a very extreme person and always kind of wants one more drink, one more whatever, one more coffee, just to, I was always kind of wanting to, and it's almost like an escape. And I do think it was good because it allowed me to tap into something that made me realize there was something in breath work. But then when I first worked with Ed, who's, you work with, he set up Breathwork Bali, and as your co-founder of Breath Lab, he was saying for me, the important part was going to be the after the peak of the process. And it was actually as you said, like how to calm and relax, because I find it very difficult. What have you, if you can remember, from when you first started working with me, bear in mind, the fact that I've been dealing with chronic health issues and my nervous system is, it has been in fight or flight for quite some time. What did you notice about me at the beginning, and what could you say maybe has changed over time with my nervous system, with my breath, and where could you see that going as well?
Yeah. The biggest shift I've seen is in your active breath. So I remember when you came to me, I remember being like, well, that's a breath pattern I haven't seen before. And there was a lot of efforting and pushing, and I could see it in multiple areas of your body. in the way that the muscles were working to bring in breath and also to allow it to come out. And I've seen a huge shift in the softness, which has now actually allowed breath to move from the belly up to the heart. And that, you know, energetically, we're looking at actually like connecting our root and our sense of safety with our heart's desires and being able to actually let that flow in our lives. So that's huge. And it shifts, like if you think about, so this is kind of putting a magnifying glass on someone's breathing pattern. So for you, these muscles were significantly overworking to get breath into your body. And now I've seen a shift in the mechanics and what the muscles that are actually being used. I would say your diaphragm's strengthened. And so you can effectively bring in a breath without having to use all of these additional muscles of respiration. Yeah, and then I think alongside of that, we still see these really deep rest states that you go into, and knowing that your body will become more and more attuned to actually being able to access those, alongside of finding a way to activate when you need to without bringing so much tension into the whole body. So I think it's just like there's just a few more layers of that can continue to be unpacked.
Yeah, and how could that? I think what was really interesting was that we had like a big break of working with each other, didn't we? We worked with each other once a week for I don't know 3 months, maybe 2 or 3 months. I think it was 3 months, and then went away, and I came back, and I was expecting it was going to be like first day of school again, like I was just going to forgot it all. And what was really interesting was that was one of the most powerful, trusting experiences that I'd had with you. And it was like my nervous system just remembered everything. And it wasn't like I was not scared, but I was nervous that period of time apart and not doing it was going to be, I'd have wasted all of that time. And then, yeah, my nervous system just kicked in, and it was like all that work we'd been doing had actually been carrying on kind of behind the scenes. And when we spoke about it, you weren't actually that surprised that had happened. You'd seen that happen before. Why?
Yeah.
Could you talk me through that a bit?
Yeah, I mean, this even actually comes like a little bit back to not valuing rest and not understanding what are like the healing that our bodies are capable of when we just stop. And so it's still this pattern, and this is so rampant in all kinds of mindset, manifestation, like personal growth and development. It's this rampant thing of like doing the work and doing the work and doing the work. And at some point, like I think giving ourselves a break from doing the work and just going and being. And I know there were other pieces that you would have continued to be working on, but you allowed a break in your system to like focusing on like doing this thing and changing this thing. And what I've seen over and over again is that actually allows it to land in like deeper into the body and to integrate. So you continue to breathe. And so all of the things that we've been working with, we're just going to have time to compound and accumulate without the added sort of stress and focus of I need to change this thing and do this thing. Yeah. So yeah, to me, it again, in a different way, speaks to the power of rest and taking a break and having a pause and just letting our bodies, like one of the things we tap into with this kind of breath work is an altered state where as facilitators, we can see what's under the hood, basically with like, I can actually see how your autonomic nervous system is functioning, regardless of the stories you're telling me. Like I can see how your body is functioning. So we can see a lot. And yeah, and it's really like actually just giving it some time to stop trying so hard that then, yeah, kind of the things that we desire and are looking for are allowed to unfold. And yeah, and when we tap in with this breath, it's every time I am amazed by the way that there's the wisdom in our body is allowed to emerge, and it knows the path to healing, and it knows the path to all of these things that we want. If we just step out of the way and step back a little bit more to let our bodies take over, then it's a little bit easier too.
Yeah. I know.
Just give yourself a break.
Definitely.
And that's the medicine, or that's the healing.
What was I remember quite a lot about when I first spoke to Ed, but then also spoke to you. I said to Ed, like, how much I think that's always my question. How much do I need to do to get the results I want? And if I do more, will that get? And I remember him saying, like, if you just, if you did one-on-one session like a week, that's amazing. Even if you're doing just one, one group session, and I think we probably need to talk through people what that actually is, because I
What
think
that means.
we'll realize we haven't done that. So sorry to everyone listening. And that in itself, just doing that consistently over time will have an impact. And I remember when I first spoke to you, I think we had our first session, my mind was blown. I was like, okay, can we do like 3 a week or something? And you were like, whoa. No, once a week is fine. Let's see how we get on. Once a week is fine. And we've never done more than one in a week. Why is that? Because obviously with stuff like the gym or with a lot of other things, people think that, I guess there's a tipping point with the gym where if you go over a certain point, there's diminishing returns. Is that the case with like breath work and conscious connected breathing? Like if you just do too much, it's too much for the body to handle?
I mean, I come from, so part of my training back in Canada was I think there was a couple trainings where it was like, went into a breath journey twice a day for about 5 days.
Wow.
And it really, like, I remember returning home and feeling like I was high, like this and that, like I hadn't even had a breath journey that day, but I was just a bit like coming back and reintegrating into normal life and the normal pace of things. So it's not, I wouldn't say that it's damaging. However, depending on the goal, if the goal is to actually create long-term sustainable change, then we want to work in a long-term sustainable way. And and I think, I've had clients, popping into Bali that will do 2 sessions a week while they're here, partly just because they want to get kind of that dose and get that integrated before they leave again. So it's definitely not damaging. And I would also say it depends on the state of the nervous system coming in. So like now, the way that I see you breathing and the way that your body's able to downshift and not effort so much muscularly in breath, I would be like more open and more like, yeah, we could do 2 sessions a week. And it, we just look at like the balance of life as well, of like, is that really serving you to be adding that much to your schedule? And then, because then we're doing and doing and doing more and more. So if someone comes in with a really like, if they're highly dysregulated, if their system's highly dysregulated, I want at least a week for their body to just like come back to normal functioning, so that we can just giving these little doses of the shift that we want to see long term, rather than creating actually more of a stress response because we keep pushing the body.
When you say highly dysregulated, what does that mean, and how can you see that in someone's nervous system?
It can look like so many things. So it's kind of tricky because the word regulated, at least to me, feels very like controlled. Like it's a regulation, it's a law, it's a rule. It's like, and I think a lot of people have the misconception that if I have a regulated nervous system, I'm in control all of the time, which is not what we're striving for. And it's actually our ability to go into a full stress response. We don't want to eliminate the stress response, but to be able to actually activate the system and to come back out effectively. And so the way that I see this in breath specifically is, if people get into an activated state, if I cue them to do something and they can respond and actually create that shift in their breath, then we can play with things a little bit more. Like we can play with getting into more activation. But often people who are constantly doing, and this is not just work, but this is work and then hobbies, and then they're learning a language and they're doing all of these other activities, and maybe even their hobbies are really high intensity and physically demanding. That's a form. So one example, a form of dysregulation where we're actually operating way too high in sympathetic tone. We're not actually coming into deep rest. And so we end up giving ourselves these peaks of adrenaline or some kind of work and focus, so that we feel like we're coming back down, when in reality, we, like, our body doesn't have the time to come all the way back down. But so dysregulation is essentially our body typically is stuck either in a really low activation state or really high activation state, and it can't find that balance by accessing both. Where regulation would be like, we can actually access both and we don't get stuck in either of them.
That's why. Thank you for explaining that, because I think that's why I asked it, just because everyone who's listening to this will be in some form of like chronic state, which
Yeah.
means they are in that dysregulation that you talked about, and they're either stuck in activation or deactivation. I think that's what you said. And so yeah, that's how I always saw breath work, and that's how I see, what we're doing, in that it's training me to safely activate and deactivate. Would you say that's right?
Yeah, and yeah, I guess deactivate is an okay word. It would be like to be able to activate and downshift.
Yeah.
Um, and it really, I mean, yeah, it's way easier if I have a whiteboard and can draw all of these things to explain how the autonomic nervous system functions and how it actually creates shifts in our heart rate and our blood pressure and digestion even. But yeah, it is actually training your system to have more familiarity in both states so that it doesn't perceive. Typically when people get stuck in high activation, the perception is that if they rest, if they truly actually come down into rest, which is a state of safety in the body, that it's actually threatening. And that can be something that's conditioned from the day they were born. So it can be conditioned from memories we don't actually have consciously. And so it's retraining the body that it's actually safe to rest, and it's safe to activate, and it's safe to move in and out of those states.
Cool. I keep having more questions that come into my head, and then I realized we need to explain the actual process
Oh,
of
right.
Could
We'll just leave it as a mystery. Come to Breathwork
what is
Bali.
this thing? Could you explain what a journey, like, I guess, summarize what a journey looks like, but also how you facilitate that?
Yeah. Yeah, so the breather is always, we always start laying on the back, and it's very typical that the breather will stay on their back the entire time. And as a facilitator, there's in a one-on-one session, there's often dialogue that we get to talk a little bit about what's happening in life. Are there like some big questions or some challenges that are arising? We always invite an intention to focus the power of our conscious mind and in what it is we want to invite in. And yeah, and then we get into a cyclical form of breathing, and I will guide the person into it. I bring a lot of body work on and hands-on to help shift the functionality of breath and respiration ideally to create more dynamism, as we've been talking about. Because when we have more dynamism available in our breath, like the ability to upshift and downshift, that's going to be mirrored in the way that our autonomic nervous system can function. So yeah, so we go through a bit of a bell curve where I'll bring someone typically into their body, bringing a little bit of a rest and downshift. And then we start the cyclical breathing, and it typically comes up to the top of the bell curve, which I usually explain as the peak experience, where there can be, as you've experienced a few of these, there can be physical sensation, emotional shifts can happen, mental clarity can come through. A lot of people do have spiritual or mystical experiences. And then from that peak experience, we always create a downshift with extended relaxation at the end. And yeah, the whole time for any of the practitioners on our team will offer verbal coaching throughout, depending on what we're seeing in the breath, and inviting different sounds potentially, or breathing into different areas of the body. And yeah, we bring through and we continue to create some interesting facilitations just based on what we see happening in the body. And really we're reading the whole body. We're definitely like very highly trained in reading someone's breath and their breath pattern. But then we're watching the whole nervous system and looking for cues of what might want to emerge. This is where it gets a little more interesting, where we're creating a space to actually complete old reflexes that might be physical and stored in the body and in the hindbrain. Does that answer the question for you?
Yeah, no, you did very,
Yeah.
very well, very well. So I guess what's interesting about doing it in a group setting is that you witness a lot of people processing like trauma and things that have happened in the past. So it's not just, and correct me when I'm saying these statements, I'm saying them for you to confirm in case I'm wrong. It's not just someone just regulating their nervous system. It's actually processing things that are maybe stuck in their nervous system or something. Again, not technical at all. As long as I'm not saying diagrammatic. But yeah, so they're processing stuff that is maybe actually stopping them from moving forward. And I think I've said it to you a few times. Whenever I'm in these states, I get this almost like deja vu moment to when I've done like plant medicine, and there's that connection to something else that allows me to other stuff to come up for me. I am not an emotional person, as we've talked about in the past. I can count on, you know, one hand the amount of times I've cried in the last however many years. And yet when I've been working with you, I think I've been in tears twice, and then in Circle, I think I've been in tears once, and I think one or two of those times actually like properly crying. What is it about? What is it about the process that allows people as emotions to show like that? And what is that doing on a deeper level in terms of like allowing someone to process stuff?
Yeah, so it is entirely related to regulating our nervous system. So I mean, yeah, I mean, I could probably talk for hours on this, so I'll see if I can be succinct. So I consider emotion as energy, and motion, it's something that wants to move through the body. It's typically related to some kind of shift in nervous system activation, where even for me, even when there's tears, there can be quite a bit of activation in my body to then move into that release. And I mean, it's unfortunate so far that there's not a lot of research that's been done on emotionality or expressing emotions or tears and what's the benefit, you know, evolutionarily, why do we still do this? So the reason we can get into dysregulation is, so if we go back to this example of a person who is in really high tone and staying there with all of their hobbies, and they're just keeping themselves way higher than probably is actually really healthy for a human body. There, in some way, there's some kind of avoidance of, if they actually allow themselves to drop down, there's probably a lot of emotion that they were either not, that they were likely conditioned to either not express. It either wasn't safe to express it, or it wasn't acceptable to express it, or they didn't know what to do with it if they're really big emotions. So a lot of our coping mechanisms that create a dysregulated nervous system are typically actually about avoiding feeling what's there. And it is, you know, like, I don't want to say that this is bad, because it is actually our nervous system's ability to keep us safe. If I perceive, you know, if as a child, when I got upset, my mom walked out of the room, that creates that information to me at that young age, and in that nervous system, my connection to my mom, and specifically the mom, but any main primary caretaker, is my access to life itself. If I, as a child and as a baby, don't have a caretaker, I'm going to die. I can't provide for myself. So the information that happens is, when I express emotion, tears specifically, my caretaker, my access to living, my survival, walks out of the room. So there's something that happens deep within us at this unconscious level that, okay, I'm not going to emote, because then I lose access to life, and that's dangerous. It's a survival response. So there, in a lot of ways, there is wisdom to it, and eventually we come to these spaces of, okay, this doesn't serve me anymore. I can actually provide for myself. And then the dysregulation is from all of these old emotions and processes that we suppressed and repressed over and over again, that those do actually get, and there's this generalized term of, they get stuck in the body. There's some research and evidence to suggest that there is, like, chemically some molecular compounds that are going to be associated with these different states. And really I specialize in the nervous system, looking at the brain specifically. So it's going to be these memories that are stamped with, like, this is really important because it means survival, that when our bodies go into a similar state. So when I was going into tears as a child, there's a shift in hormones that are flowing in my body to create that response. And if I learned that I needed to shut that down to maintain safety and connection to life, then through my life, when that hormonal balance and soup is created inside my body, there's going to be a similar signal in my brain of like, oh, wait, we can't go there because that is not safe. So we're just going to suppress that. And it learns actually to do that. So what's happening is it's called transient hypofrontality when we go into this type of breath work, because we're creating some really big shifts in blood chemistry, and one of them being the levels of oxygen and CO2. And there's something called the blood-brain barrier it's hypersensitive to allowing, like, to what it allows actually to cross through from the bloodstream into the brain to protect us. So it's preventing a lot of toxins and things to come through. It's very sensitive to oxygen levels, again, to just protect the tissues in the brain. And so when we rapidly increase that amount of oxygen, it's going to limit where the blood is flowing. So we're essentially turning the dial down on something called the default mode network. This is also not, we don't have a lot of evidence for this, which is what Edward and I are working on with Breath Lab. But the theory and what all the literature suggests and points to is that we're turning down the default mode network, which it's the thing that keeps us functioning on the day-to-day of being able to keep things organized and being able to function. And it's probably the most closely associated to the ego. Like, that's the part of the brain that is the ego. And it's not one specific area, it's a network. And so when we turn the dial down on that, we turn the dial down on the prefrontal cortex. And one of the functions you ask all the questions you need to clarify this if this isn't clear, but one of the functions of prefrontal cortex, default mode network, executive functioning is actually to inhibit memories and emotions that don't let us function. So when we turn the dial down on that inhibition, those memories and emotions it's way more possible for them to emerge. And especially when we're creating major shifts in the hormones that are circulating in our body, because we're going into some kind of a stress response when we go into this type of breath, then it is actually surfacing some of those old memories that are connected to that same hormonal state in our body. So there's less inhibition, which means it's easier for it to actually emerge. And then we're creating significant shifts in our body that are closely associated to what the state of our body would have been when we were in those past experiences. And so this is where, we actually get to tone down normal functioning and let our body bring something up that wasn't able to be expressed or felt fully. And that's when people will go into, some really big process and big emotion. And our job and our role as facilitators is to support them to complete that process rather than to shut it down again. So allowing rage, sadness, fear, body movement to actually come through that maybe they didn't get to do because they repressed or suppressed it, depending on what happened.
So I do understand what you're saying. I guess I just wanted to, like, my interpretation of some of the stuff you said, like, so when someone's had like a lot of stuff that they're dealing with and they are essentially like repressing feelings and memories and stuff like that, would you say that in itself, the body will be working so hard and essentially kind of like compensating to not let that rise to the surface? Once you process that, the body doesn't have to work as hard and it reverts back to how it was before all this shit was happening, and it can therefore focus on things it's meant to focus on, like the whole of your body working like in tandem with each other. Is that kind of it?
Yeah, I like that actually. And there's, like, anyone who's listening to this right now, if you think about getting really angry or having an emotion come up, like maybe tears or sadness, and think about that coming up, and then think about how would you suppress it? How would you stop it from coming out? Or even if you wanted to say something to someone because you were really frustrated, how do we stop that? And if you like do that with your body right now, for me, there's so much tension. There's like literally clenching my jaw so that it doesn't come out. And the more often we do that, it's like the same as going to the gym. The more often we do that, we are creating a pattern and a habit in our system to hold that tension. And so exactly when we allow those things to surface and actually fully express and release, like allow energy to move through our body, it's then releasing that memory associated with holding. And so like physically through our body, there can be softening, and when we're literally not gripping and holding as much, even in fascial tissue, which is like a kind of like a web network between the skin and muscle and bone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The reason why I was really keen to put this episode out there is because I think, so everyone who's listening to this has got some form of chronic illness, and they're either kind of maybe well attuned to like more alternative ways of recovery. So like a lot of my audience will know around like brain retraining and stuff like that, and other people are just like very attached to a diagnosis and will want medication or want something specifically to get something out of them that's in there. What's really interesting about like all of these interviews I've done of people with chronic illness, they quite often have a very like type A personality, like push, a lot of people pleasing, a lot of control, like wanting to control like the outcomes of everything. And so a lot of that behavior takes a lot of effort and a lot of clinging, as you said. And so the reason why I wanted to talk about this was because I can see when I've gone through this process with you, like, and when we had that break and we met back up, the difference in my trust. Do you remember we were talking about? And it was like the trust. I was trying to control everything before, and I thought that the more I like went and pushed, that would have a better outcome. And I just went with it. I put my trust in my nervous system, which I hadn't done in a long time. I put my trust in you, and I had the one of the best and most relaxing, the best like upward journey and one of the most relaxing like downward journey. And I just thought that was like a real lesson for me in terms of like my own like chronic illness journey and how this process is helping me. I've realized I haven't just asked you a question. I've just rambled for 2 minutes.
It's a beautiful reflection though. Yeah.
I'm just trying to make sure that anyone who's listening to this can reflect what we're talking about to their situation and how I've done that. Because let's say you've got chronic fatigue or Lyme disease or something like that. It's not an obvious thing to do to go and do breath work to try and help your recovery. Out of interest, outside of me, have you worked with people who've had chronic illness or chronic issues before?
Yeah. I think one of the ones that stood out remarkably was back in Canada in Squamish with a woman who'd been experiencing some pretty severe symptoms of fibromyalgia. And in the first session that she ever experienced, there was a release of pain. Like it was like she felt so much relief, and it lasted for about a week. And this is really a tricky one that for me keeps me on my toes and interested and engaged with this work, because this form of work lands so differently because we are so unique and individual. We have different genetics, epigenetics, life experiences, and different ways that we've learned how to cope with things and interact with our emotions, and the fact that we're human. And this speaks to the power that is available there. And so, I've worked with folks who've had, they've had asthma coming in and out. And this is definitely a much lighter condition, but it's fascinating how, and I mean, that's related to the lungs as well, but how that would shift. And it's people who know that it's stress induced asthma. And so there's all kinds of physical conditions and symptoms that can be supported and to some degree alleviated. And I will say that depending on your breathwork practitioner, I would suggest someone highly, highly skilled for anyone who has like mid-range to severe symptoms, because we don't want to push your system when it's already operating at a really high level of trying to cope with what's happening. We want to actually be able to work with the system and what's there and start to create this form of regulation, but probably a lot of it's going to be body work and a little bit more gentle breathing, and the relaxation piece is the thing. And I would also highly recommend Gabor Mate. I don't know if you've talked about him ever before, and his book, When the Body Says No. because there could also be, before even bringing in a somatic modality, which is based on the body, and this one, breathwork is within the wider umbrella of somatic therapy. And it's a little bit more vigorous. And I like to describe it sometimes as like a surgery where we're going in and going to the root of something. And it can be quite demanding on the body. Whereas there are other forms of somatic therapy that are more about but more diving into the emotionality piece and actually surfacing emotions to be expressed, which might create more ease in the body, and then moving into something like breathwork that's a little more vigorous. So yeah, I would say there's like a spectrum of entry points. And this is another thing that we're wanting to look at with BreathLab is how can we identify who's really ready for this? Like, who is this really going to serve, and who maybe needs some other pieces before their system is ready to hold that process and integration.
Yeah. Just with regards to, I know people are listening to this and they're like, oh, I'm gonna have to go to Bali to do this. I'm sure as much as obviously, you know, the work you guys do is going to be like one of the best you can get, but I'm sure there will be other modalities or potentially practitioners who do this in other parts of the world. If people want to try and access something similar, or at least get started, or what would be the best way for them to do that, do you think?
Yeah. Yeah. I
I
mean, there are yeah, there are we're starting to have more and more facilitators internationally. And there are some folks that I would refer people to who aren't technically part of our brand or our specific technique, who are just they know what they're doing. Other modalities I would refer to will be Feldenkrais, which is body-based. Also folks who, and it's very likely going to be counselors and therapists who specialize in somatic experiencing. And this is pointing to the work of Peter Levine. And then additionally, and a phenomenal online resource that I don't have enough online resources to offer, but a phenomenal one is Irene Lyons. She's from Vancouver, and she does incredible work and has really incredible nervous system health educational pieces and also online programs that she puts together really, really beautifully that can effectively support people. Whereas with breathwork, I really, especially if there are symptoms that are very present in the body, I don't recommend breathwork online. Like I would suggest not to be guided virtually. Because there's such a different level of safety that's created when there's another nervous system, which would be me, the facilitator, in the room. And even as you spoke to, this trust piece of our nervous systems get attuned to each other. And it's like, oh, it's so much easier to trust in this moment because I know that system and I know that it's going to hold the space. And I know that, yeah, there's just such deeper levels we can go to. And it is, I would say it is safer when there's a lot already going on in the body.
Yeah, well, I even think I've had this with my exercise, like working with Johnson, my trainer, because I think my nervous system had to trust his nervous system, and that took months. And then when it did, like even I had a bit of a setback last week, and he then told me, "No, I'm good to carry on. It's fine. Maybe just make these changes." And 2 days later, I was back on track. So it's interesting knowing that you have that support. Do you people that you would recommend, that you could recommend, maybe you can talk to me about that after we stop recording. Are they where are they based? Are they in the US, in Canada?
We have some in the US. There are a couple in Canada on the West Coast that I can recommend. We have a few in Germany. There's one in Ireland, I think maybe Spain, Australia. So it's starting to slowly trickle out, and we're figuring out our systems for that.
That's a pretty good spread. It's a better spread than I thought.
Ish.
Yeah. It's
yeah.
I think that okay. And then just in terms of like outside of that and just going back to basics, someone's actually asked about Buteyko breathing, like that kind of breathing, like, and just doing stuff on their own, someone who's got a lot of symptoms, someone who's, potentially just struggling in all areas. What would you say is like a good, something good to start with and just be consistent with, that's just easy to do?
Yeah, Buteyko there is some research on that one, some literature and evidence to show what it's doing for the system. And I would say either that one or the cadence breathing that I suggested to you. And it really is, it's about the consistency of doing it, where I love this little metaphor of like, yeah, I ate a salad when I was 25, so I'm good. I'm healthy. Like, or I went to the gym a few times back like 10 years ago, and so now I'm fit. Where it's like, we actually need to be consistent with these practices. And so my suggestion is to start with what's actually realistic for the individual. So if someone, for example, if someone looks at Buteyko and tries it and it feels really challenging in their body, like there can be, because that one can be pushing the limits a little bit in training our tolerance to CO2 in the body, which is really impactful for how much the amygdala will signal off stress, like a stress response. But yeah, it's going to depend on how it feels in the body. I find cadence breathing to be one of the softest to start with. And there is some really incredible evidence to suggest that. And I think it's practicing it twice a day. I think it's 20 minutes each time. That it significantly shifts people's HRV, which is a measurement of how our autonomic nervous system is functioning. And that's going to create change in, like, no matter what pain or discomfort you're experiencing, if the autonomic nervous system is functioning in a more balanced way, it's going to support a little bit more ease in your body. So yeah, aiming for what's realistic, and maybe the first week it's 1 minute of cadence breathing every day or 5 days a week. And there's such simple practices, but I like the compounding effect of staying with them is going to make a big difference in nervous system function.
And cadence breathing is just breathing in slowly for 5 or 6 seconds, breathing out slowly for 5 or 6 seconds. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, technically, the most ideal way is actually to get the individual assessed for what really works for their system. And a great starting point, like if you don't have access to that, between 6 to 8 seconds inhale and 6 to 8 seconds exhale, and not a big like not breathing in really fast, but long, slow, deep inhale and long, slow, deep exhale, and staying with that for like up to 20 minutes at a time. This also is a form of retraining our attention, and it's like can be a form of meditation as well. Yeah. So even starting with just a 6-second inhale, 6-second exhale through the nose and ideally also focusing on first breathing into the belly and then letting it come up to the chest it will be very beneficial for anyone.
Do you have your? I should have asked you this, given that you told me to do it, and I had my eyes closed and I was treating it like a meditation. Is that what you're meant to be doing? Yeah.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, you could do it eyes open and still treat it like a meditation. I sometimes will do it like while I'm driving my scooter in the traffic here. I'll sometimes do cadence breathing, just like you can practice it at any point. You can take 3 of those breaths at any point. I also, as I'm on the computer so much for my master's program, I find myself like, oh, I'm not breathing right now. Like I'm holding my breath because I'm focusing so much. I don't know why our systems do that or why my system does that. And so I often will resource myself by doing that. Yeah, a few times.
Yeah, I think because I stopped doing it and started doing box breathing again, and I think it was because I was like thinking I might feel something from it. I guess what you're saying is it's the type of thing that you just know, if you did it consistently, it's the type of thing you'll notice in like a year and a half or something like that, or like
and potentially shorter. I think this study, I want to say it was 10 to 12 weeks.
Okay.
That the study was on, so it's not even necessarily a full year. And I would also say I don't think there's been any comparison studies to look at the difference between cadence and box breathing. And I would just say like box breathing, as you know yourself, is a little more of that like extreme and that edge, and I want to feel something interesting and funky, which can be completely overwhelming for some people's systems. To like pause in those pauses, it can be really, really challenging. So I just come back to like, just keep your breath moving and keep it gentle and long.
Yeah.
And that also will help to retrain folks who do have a tendency to hyperventilate, which is just breathing a bit faster than, and actually like the ideal rate of a human to breathe is 6 times a minute. So that's 5-second inhale, 5-second exhale. So it's also training our system to slow down in the breath.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Cool. I'm just trying to think if there's anything else. I realize we're kind of running out of time. I guess just in terms of like a lot of people who are listening to this have got chronic fatigue or stuff where they're, as you say, don't want something too activating. Do you think that even if they were like watching this and they were like, okay, well, I want to go and call the first person that Phil recommends that's in the US, would you recommend for them to do like something like cadence breathing before they even go and do something like that and do long
absolutely
periods of time doing that first?
Yeah, and even, I mean, I could even, with the people that I would recommend, letting, like, of course, there will be an intake form and just letting them know the state of their body, and that they'll just maybe have a few gentle journeys, which could still bring up a lot. But creating a relationship, like your own autonomous relationship with your breath, is going to be effective no matter what. So yes, in preparation, that's definitely something that could create a nice foundation. And also, I would also say, like, each person needs to check in with themselves of like, does it feel available and appropriate for me to go do this? And then knowing that it will be gentle at the beginning from the facilitator's lens. Yeah.
Cool. And I did find that reading that book, when we talked about it quite a lot, Breath by James, is it James Clear? Is that his name?
James Nestor.
James Nestor, not Clear. I felt like that was really good and just like really opening my eyes in terms of like
to the importance of it.
Yeah. Cool. Well, look, hang on, sorry, quickly. With Breath Lab, sorry, could you just we didn't even talk about that, and then it's absolutely crazy what you guys are doing, and I'm about to get hooked up to it tomorrow. Could you just just spend a couple of minutes just talking to us about that? Won't take up too much of your time.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm incredibly excited. This is the reason that I moved halfway across the world. So Edward Dangerfield and I have founded this company because we want to really understand what are we shifting in brain state and potentially in long-term brain function through this modality. So we've secured a really incredible investor who has given us enough to build our own treatment room. And also we now have a couple of EEG caps, so we can actually look at the frequency of neural activity that's happening in different areas of the brain as we, like, before the journey, through the journey, and then afterwards, and see what kinds of shifts we're creating at just like at baseline at rest. So tomorrow we're gonna hook up a cap with a bunch of electrodes on your head, get that baseline reading, see what's going on in there, and then track it all the way through the journey and see what kinds of shifts and changes. And I had my my training with this company at the beginning of January, and we had 3 people come through. So it's like definitely not anything that we can not enough evidence to say anything really with, but we saw the similar patterns in brain function from beginning to end in each person. So it's really exciting and interesting to see what we're going to find. It's definitely a frontier. Nobody's done this with breath before, so it's exciting.
Amazing. So do you think from that you will be able to, because obviously right now a lot of what you guys do is through intuition, like what you've seen before, like when you adjust people, when you know you've seen stuff before, or like and that's really effective. But do you think that you will therefore be able to, I don't know how it works because I haven't seen it, but you'll be looking at readings and you'll be like, okay, that produced that before, maybe I can do that, and then you'll have a better idea of kind of
where we're taking.
Exactly.
This is one of the visions that Ed and I hold for this project, is that we can actually, like, already our facilitators are probably, like, it's probably one of the most in-depth trainings globally for the amount of body work and reading of the breath and the nervous system.
That's so exciting. The minute you mentioned this EEG thing, I was like, "Meet up." So tomorrow, maybe maybe I'll do like an update afterwards so I can tell people what the hell's going on.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool.
Yeah.
That's awesome. If anyone wanted to like reach out to you, maybe on social media or anything like that, would that be okay?
Yeah, Instagram is the like one of the only places that I'm active, and I haven't even been posting that much lately, but there is actually a decent amount of content that I've put on there about amygdala hijacking, what's nervous system regulation. If you want to understand like perceiving threat versus perceiving threat safety and how that impacts, I've dumped a bunch of very nerdy content in there that I believe is also easy to understand. So yeah, go to the profile, see what's there. There might be some really valuable pieces if people want to have a better understanding or if things didn't seem fully clear here. So just at Satori Clarke with an E at the end of Clarke.
Awesome. Yeah, I'll put all that stuff in the show
Perfect.
notes. Awesome. Thank
Perfect.
you so much for coming on.
No
And yeah,
problem.
I'm so excited.
Thanks for having me, Phil. Yeah, that'll be fun tomorrow.